Little acrobatics there.
Very skillful.
Thank you very much. I've been working out.
You're so tan, dude. It's making me... whatever.
In this light, aren't we all tan?
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you guys for tuning in. Sorry I'm an hour late. Traffic. But you know what? Here we are.
Half an hour. Well, I don't know.
Oh, it is half shoot. True, it's half an hour. I'm here with Brian Johnson, artist, designer. I mean, kind of contemporary Renaissance man. You probably don't like that term, but that's how I might describe you.
I'll take it.
You'll take it. So, I mean, dude, there's so many things that we could talk about. But it's interesting because the last couple artists who I've talked to, Alex Feliciano and Julia Francis, it's interesting. Both of them have really like multiple practices. You know, they do several things, and that's certainly true of you. And it's interesting because right before I jumped in the car, I've not met this artist, a guy named Greg Rose. He's a fantastic LA artist, amazing work. Also does multiple things, and we were actually talking about the fact that the art world, at least the art world in the past, has sort of frowned a little bit upon the idea that you might have multiple identities and that you might do multiple things and not necessarily rank them in terms of preferring one. And so I don't want to presume to put you in a box or anything, but that is kind of how I see you and your practice. Would you agree with that? And if so, I'm kind of curious to hear, I don't know, has it always been true? And just hear what you think about, or hear you talk about that part of that aspect of your work.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know. So when I started even thinking about, I think it's funny to say being an artist, like you become one or something, well, right? Like you start off as like this cocoon, and then you turn into a butterfly.
Wake up, hey man, here I am.
Yeah, it's like this is it, this is me. But I think like when I think about a practice, or I think about why I do things or the way I do things, I think I've always been wanting to learn. I've always been like, I was not a good student in school by far. Junior high, elementary, junior high, of course, learning was fun. By the time I got to high school, aside from other things in my life, there was like, I just didn't want to learn, or I had no interest in learning.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that was probably partially me, maybe teachers, but I am a teacher. We can get into that.
Yeah, I want to talk about that for sure.
But I just didn't have a passion for wanting to do new things. That was probably just maybe a teenage thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then so, after I really started to get into art in my later years, I always wanted to learn. I was more of like, it was about making something interesting maybe for people to, engage with and myself, but I really wanted to learn new things. And so the only way I could learn new things is to try new things, right? Different mediums, different approaches, or whatever I saw was influencing me. And I just sort of it's almost like letting that process guide me, right? Guide me as an artist. Or if I, stumble across something and I'm like, ooh, what's this? And I wanted to figure out how to do it. It's funny because I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and he was talking about branding and talking about his, like, the pottery he does. And he's sort of talking about, branding in a way of that kind of tied in with this practice. And I'm like, dude, it's the exploration of coming up with new things and new ideas, and a brand is part of an artist now. It's not, it's not like I can't just, trot my stuff off to a place, drop it off, and say, brand me. You have to do that. Like, it's sort of... Right.
Do you think, though, that the fact that you can do just about anything, I mean, I'm not trying to, like, blow smoke up your ass or anything, but you really can do a lot more different things than most artists that I know, technically speaking.
I think it's...
Well, so I was going to ask you, do you think that's your brand, though? Do you think that can be a brand?
Yeah.
Multiplicity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even comes to the fact... I think that has a lot to do with my background as an illustrator and going to school for illustration.
I didn't know you went to school for illustration. Maybe I did.
When I was at Cal State Fullerton, before I ever even decided to get into the MFA program and all that, I wanted to be an illustrator. I wanted to be a political cartoonist, something like that. Something in magazines, or at the time, magazine. It was just like late 90s, early 2000s.
Remember those?
Yeah, right. And so I was like, I just love to draw. First and foremost, I love to draw. Right. It may not seem like it based on like...
What do you mean? Of course it... Yeah.
As far as like creating a drawing, I haven't done one in years. Like sat down and made a drawing and like...
What about all the drawings I just posted on my feed?
Those are probably...
The ones with the ink? There's one that with your hand drawing?
Yeah, but those are probably a year or two old or something.
Oh, okay.
And when I say old, I think like last week's old.
I forgot.
I work with teenagers, man. Last week is old. Okay.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, and so for me, like... And that goes to the other thing, too, is like, whatever I'm creating now is what I'm into.
Right.
Yesterday is gone.
Yeah.
Right? And tomorrow, I don't know what's going to happen, so I can only live now, right? And for me, it was like, it was partially how do I figure out how something works?
Right.
Sort of like a mechanic, right? And but in the same time, I'm like, I want to also create something, right? If I was to look at artists from the past or look at art history and I look at a painting, I appreciated the artwork and I wasn't really interested in the history of it or
Right.
what was going on. I'm like, how did they get that color? How did they get that texture?
Yeah.
I was more worried like the physical part of it.
Right.
I didn't really wasn't interested in like.
And
the
maybe you're
background.
still not.
I like artists' personality. I like biographies on artists.
Yeah.
I like about them and then their work. But for the most part, I look at them like, how did they make that microphone? I wonder like what's going on inside of it, and like things like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, maybe I could do something like that or make something. It's like this thing, right? For instance, like,
You just made this.
I made this yesterday. I didn't make it, but I ripped the guts out. It's an old
Lantern,
Coleman
right?
lantern,
Yeah.
like a what is it, white gasoline, kerosene, something. I ripped it out, cut the insides out of it, pulled all the old kerosene stuff out, bought this like kind of fake firelight, and then built it back together. You know, so it was like deconstructed the thing and
Yeah.
then put it back together because I wanted the. Obviously, I'm not going to burn kerosene in here. I'm not crazy. That'd be dangerous.
Right.
But I love the look of it. It reminds
It's
me of
beautiful.
camping.
It's
It
a
reminds me
beautiful
of
object.
childhood.
Sure.
It's like
Well, it reminds me a little bit of your MFA installation.
yeah,
The
it's,
nostalgia, because that I mean, for those people who didn't see it, that was based on Land of the Lost, sort of. Well, that was one of the themes.
I had recreated
Yeah.
the slee stack pylon thing.
Right,
And-
and the whole thing was sort of like spacey and a little bit psychedelic-ish,
Yeah, it's
but
like-
also like kid-like and
Yeah, definitely
right?
a lot to do with like childhood stuff, growing up in the '80s,
Yeah.
nostalgia, lawn
Yeah.
chairs, fake grass,
Yeah. Yeah.
TVs, big
So-
spinning. But that was all like those types of things. For me, the challenge of putting that thing together was the best part of it.
Right.
And I had help, like people, hey, maybe you should try this, do that, and suggestions, and I'm like, yeah, that's great, that works. Like it was the physicality part of it.
So that's what occupies your thoughts. Well, okay, so here's just an observation. I don't really want to play the role of your professor because I never actually felt like that anyway. By the way, I didn't really feel like you needed a professor at all. We'll get into that maybe a little later.
I probably needed a manager.
Well, I would be a bad choice for that because you're
Right?
my time management. Well, it's better now. But so what I was going to say was, one of my observations about your work is that it actually has a lot of content to it, all of it, and it may not be your job, you personally, your job to even consider that content because it just comes out anyway. And what you just sort of said about focusing on the physical kind of backs that up. And I guess the thing that's interesting to me is that there's this, it's one of the things about school, not just our school, but just academia in general, that I kind of call bullshit on, which is this idea that an artist is supposed to be their own curator and their own historian, and that if you are a good historian or a good curator of yourself, it means you make better work. And I just think it's fucking bullshit.
That was one of the toughest things we had to do in graduate school.
Well, okay.
Was
And so-
was talk about work and back it up with some sort of
So-
historical reference, or I don't know. Whatever.
Right. Well, I feel like I need to. Well, I'm not. If I were Catholic, I would say some Hail Marys. I'm not sure what, as a bad Jew, I should do other than eat some pork. No. But in all seriousness, we kind of talked about this privately already. But I felt some remorse for playing a small-ish part in oppressing you. Although you didn't seem to be bothered by it anyway, but because you're not a whiner and you just do your shit. But I do think it might be just worth I don't want to spend the whole time talking about this, but I kind of think it's worthwhile talking about because I think this post-COVID time in general seems to me to be a good time to reset a number of things, in terms of community, building communities. I think the art world is going to be a different looking place than it was, though of course it's hard to say how, but I can sense it, and I was just talking to a lot of people about that. So I think it's worth just talking about for a minute that to me there's something wrong with an institution that can't accommodate somebody. I shouldn't say can't accommodate. You did a great show and you were well respected, so I guess they accommodated you. But I kind of feel like we, and I use the large we, kind of fought you a little bit tooth and nail, trying to get you to pick a vision, focus on a conceptual, angle. And to your credit, man, you kind of played the game in the end. Like, you kind of did it. But I don't actually know that it. Well, I'm just going to go on a limb. I don't really think it did you any good. I think you had a good experience. You made great work, and you met some cool people, and you built a good community. But I am not convinced that the experience that you had of having to focus and hunker down on one thing actually made one fucking bit of difference to your development as an artist in reality. And I don't know if you want to address that.
Nope, totally agree.
This was not rehearsed, guys.
Yeah,
it wasn't. We did not talk about it.
Totally agree because.
Okay, so I'm interested if you want to elaborate on that a little. It might be helpful.
I think I guess I should start by saying like what at the time what I was looking for out of graduate school. And I say it like that because
sure.
I wouldn't go to an institution, pay money, or spend my time, which is very valuable to me,
right.
away from my family and stuff like that,
of course.
to pursue something that I didn't really want to do.
Right.
Now I'm still at that point. I'm already a full-time teacher. I don't need a master's degree
no.
to get more pay or any.
You certainly don't. You certainly don't need like a shitty grad studio to make work in, because look at this.
Right. Right.
So,
my motivations, whatever that may be, would, if that's the right word, were not, geez, I really need this, or
right.
else
and
or else I'm not going to have a job.
And to be fair, for many people that is true.
I know,
right? So you were kind of an exception.
That's why I did not have to hold that extra baggage of worrying about those things. And I really felt for those people that were
felt for
getting
them.
Getting that degree so they could then apply for a job or get some sort of foot in the door.
Sure.
Whatever their motivations were.
Yeah.
I mean, I empathized with it, but I wasn't really sympathetic to the
it's
to the drama of it. I don't.
There was plenty of that.
Yeah, it's fine. Everybody deals with everything in their own way, and I respect it all.
Of course.
So for me, though, I was like, man, I really want to be challenged. I really did want somebody to challenge me outside of my own head.
Sure. Okay, so that did happen.
I would have made work anyway. I would have made art no matter what, or I would have built something, or woodwork. It doesn't matter.
Right.
But I was like, man, I think it's good to have somebody other than your friends or family.
Oh yeah. That I agree.
Look at your work and maybe tell you ways of improvement, insights. Definitely not to steer you in a direction that you're not naturally going to go, though. And I think that's very difficult for a professor to look at somebody based on what they show art pieces on a wall, let's say, and say, oh, I can tell where this person's going to go, and I'm going to be able to give them the correct advice. I am going to be able to give them the correct advice to guide them in the way they should go. Right. Even if they don't think so, I know better.
Well, that is a bit of a modernist thing, which is like it's kind of like the Navy SEAL model, where you break them down and then rebuild them.
Because I work with teenagers, and for the most part, they're really smart, intelligent kids, and I call them kids. But I know people like, well, they're adults or young adults. I'm like, well, to me, they're children. I'm 48.
Right.
They're children. No,
I understand.
And so, when I relate to them, because when they ask me, what do you think about this? Mm-hmm. Or what do you think I should do? I want to do this, or I want to do that. Coming up in the future, I think I might want to go to school for this. What do you think? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And that's hard to ask them at teenagers, because a lot of them don't know what they want to do.
Yeah.
They're living in a moment, right? And so, and I try to guide them, but I definitely don't try to steer them in a direction I don't think that they would be successful based on what I see from their art.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's very difficult for a professor to work with me. And
I didn't find it difficult.
And there's I think so, because from my perspective, because I am very random.
But why is it okay? Wait a minute.
I don't follow.
Why is that so? I'm sorry. I should let you finish.
No. I don't follow the. I know a lot of artists in my life. I do associate with a lot of artists, and they are very focused on what they do, and they sort of focus on one aspect of art, and they kind of run with it, and I respect it, and I like it a lot, because I can see, hey, that's that person's work, even if I'm looking at it, if I see it on Instagram or see it somewhere and I'm like, oh, I know who made, I can tell you right now who made that. I can look at that.
I think I could do the same thing with your work, man.
You might be able to. Because
I like it.
Because you know it.
Yeah, but okay, can I back up? Can I just ask you a question, though? You describe yourself as difficult in that circumstance. Why do you need to use a pejorative term to describe the multiple aspects? Why can't it just be different than a typical person?
Well, I know myself pretty well, and I'm pretty difficult.
Brian, Brian, you were the least difficult grad student to work with I've ever. So difficult how? What do you?
I guess I shouldn't project myself in the eyes of a professor, because I would come in with sort of a different body of work every time we had a critique. I see. Right? And so I'm looking at more in the physical aspects of work, not me personally.
But I still don't understand what makes that difficult.
I think it may. Well, I didn't say it was a good or a bad thing. I'm saying
difficult because of the model that we have. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because I didn't fit the mold of what would be easy for a professor.
Well, no fucking shit. That's why it was interesting.
Yeah. No, I didn't have a problem with it, but
right.
I'm thinking, okay, if I'm 3 or 4 professors and we're all looking at critiques, and student A has a row of paintings, and they're all it looks like a show, right? Or well, I come in, I have like a video, a drawing, a painting,
but even
the sound thing, a cone on the ground with noise coming. I mean, I had some random crap. I had like melted plastic and just all kinds of.
But I guess my point is that see, the thing is, it's really random what you're saying. Not what you're saying, but the point we're making is that, I mean, I've seen exhibitions in LA that are strategically random that way, and are more random than you could ever be, by the way, I think.
Right.
And so even within the, whatever you want to call the white cube art world, and there are many art worlds, I think, but even within that randomness, interestingly, is a completely viable strategy that's accepted by the art world. So even the idea that that's difficult, to me, is an antiquated, dusty old, stodgy academic position that actually, to me, only is useful if the student for whom it's being used wants that, or it applies to them. So I'm not even against it as a principle. What I'm against it is as a default value judgment, which is really how it was implemented. Not just with you, by the way. I mean, it's just how it seems to go. But the thing that really kills me is that if you go out into the real world, like the world of your design and art practice, people don't give a fuck. They're just like, I just want something cool.
Let's put it this way. In what I do now, and things that I do, or let's say make money aside from my regular teaching job, it has only benefited me to be multifaceted. Because... So I would like to revisit something you said a minute ago, which is you thought like the way you teach is to support what people are doing naturally. And to me, that's the model, that is the notion that has been lost by the sort of Bauhaus, Yale... the East Coast beat you up until you're a bloody pulp so that you can become a new identity. It's almost like going into artistic witness protection program and coming out with unrecognizable, shining new modernist identity. And if that's what you want, I'm not even cool with that. But to kind of put people through a grinder like that, to me, A, seems presumptuous. B, seems unkind, and at very worst, abusive. I mean, potentially. Yeah, well, I mean, so no one's ever going to abuse themselves more than I abuse myself. Well, right? I mean, that's just the reality.
That might be your reality.
Right, that's my reality.
Okay,
and I mean that like is mentally, physically, emotionally.
You push yourself.
Correct.
Okay,
and so I think
you didn't suffer too much in grad school.
No,
is what you're saying.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
but
that's good.
The one thing I did notice between different kinds of graduates was the work ethic.
The lack of work ethic.
Right, the work ethic. Not that it mattered to me. But
no, I know.
I did see people that had more time on their hands than I did in life and chose not to really do much with it. And that's okay, though, because maybe they were writing. Maybe they were reading. You see, that was really the one thing that was really weird to me. When somebody would come in and say... and have a certain so I give assignments right where I work. I give assignments I wanted to do, and sometimes students do it, sometimes they don't, and that's fine.
Right.
My assignments are based on learning a new skill. Okay, I'm not talking about that high of a level, right?
No, but I get it. Yeah.
When you have a room full of people drawing, right, on easels or something like that, you can see them working. So you can see everybody's kind of working, everybody's sort of up to the same, not necessarily skill level, but they're all moving and doing something. And you notice when somebody's not.
Definitely.
Very, very, it's very clear.
Yeah.
when you give somebody 3-4 weeks, a month, and they come in and they have one thing, I felt like, man, like you're gonna get hammered right now, dude, you know.
And they did.
But on the same token, it was kind of unfair because you don't know what that person's going through. You don't know what their practice is. You don't know.
I agree.
What if they were spending most of their time researching. You know?
No, I totally agree with you, man.
For me though, I would never. My worst fear is not if I made crappy work. It's if
didn't make work.
You didn't. What have you been doing? You lazy bum. Like that would have destroyed.
That is not a problem for you, Brian.
Yeah, but that was what I.
That's what keeps you up at night.
That was my motivation.
Yeah,
correct. That's what keeps you up at night. Did I do enough today?
Sure.
Did I do enough?
Okay.
Did I work hard enough?
I mean, work ethic. I mean, yeah, you're like a steady. So that brings me to another question.
But I don't know how much that's valued. I don't know how much work ethic is valued in terms of the making. I love like making interesting art or making something that's that.
What do you think?
When you talk about a gallery and you go in, you can't tell how long it takes somebody to make something.
I mean, are you asking me my opinion?
I throw it out there because I've always struggled between those two things of looking at art and trying to figure out how long it took somebody to make it. I don't know why. And is it a physical thing?
And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but now that you brought it up, I have to ask you: is it a value for you? Is it a value? Is it like would a piece of art be less valuable to you if it didn't have as much of a work ethic in it? And you can say yes. I wouldn't judge you for saying you don't care.
No, it's almost the opposite. It's like
Why?
It's almost the opposite.
Because
even though I work really hard at what I do, I always like once I built this thing, I'm like, man, there was a quicker way I could have done that and had more time to do something else.
Okay.
Okay, so it wasn't like I just want to whip something out. But I'm like, man, I could make more if I figure out how to manage my time better, right, between things, right, or do something. And so, no, some of the pieces I had in graduate school that I would make in like 15 minutes were some of the most impressive pieces because it was the magic of how did you do it. Right. Now everybody shows their process, so there's really not much magic left.
Not everybody, but a lot of people.
I should say everybody. That's a dumb thing to say, but I'm thinking,
dumb,
but if when you lift the veil, right, and the Wizard or the Wizard of Oz guy is like revealed, it's just not
as fun or not as compelling.
No, it's not. There's no the magic behind like looking at a still piece or whatever, or a moving piece or a video. Video is different, I think, in a way that. You sort of are sitting there for a certain time, and you're like, hey, if it's a 2-hour movie, you're going for 2 hours.
Yeah, that's true. I
could go as long as I want to a gallery and leave.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've always had this fascination of like, man, I really want to know. I would like to see how they did that, or how fast it did, or long it took.
Yeah.
I guess it doesn't matter too much the time. But I am interested in the process.
Well, no, me too. To go back to your question, though, because I think it's actually something that's worth talking about, which is the notion of whether skill, I guess I'm using the word in a large sense, in the sense of skill in making it, and also perhaps work ethic in having to produce it, So I will tell you that many of my students think that skill equals value. It's almost like an implied, or I don't want to say brainwash, but it's kind of like a default, unconscious default setting, And I think that's true with many people in our culture. On the other hand, there's a whole thing in the art world. I mean, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, de-skilled work, right? Intentionally shitty materials and making it look like you don't know what the fuck you're doing. Maybe you really don't, but so, I mean, I've been through this whole rigmarole in my mind. My final conclusion, if you're asking me what I think, is I actually don't really care whether something is highly skilled or no skilled at all if the piece has presence. That's all I care about, is if the piece moves me, or maybe that word is, I don't even mean emotionally necessarily, but if it really affects me in some kind of way. And I've seen pieces that took zero skill that affected me more than pieces where people clearly, lost their left foot making that piece, So I don't know, man. I think the moral value that is attached to labor is bullshit for me in judging art. Though I do respect other people for whom I don't judge other people's value scales. But I do think that as a teacher, Look, I bet you we've all had the experience of teaching figure drawing where some kid just like, is like on their iPhone and they're kind of scribbling, not even looking at it. And the gesture drawing they come up with is fucking as good as Sargent. And they don't even know what they did. And then they fuck it up by moving the hand to the left, right? I mean, so I don't know, man. The older I get, I sound like my uncle, but the older I get, the less sure I am of what I used to think in terms of my values. That's how I feel. I don't know if that's true for you.
Yeah, well, I think since sort of when you look at students' work is different because I know their ability level, right? So I know what they went through to get to something, and I can tell how long it took them to do it. Probably because we're all using the same program, we're all, and I do a demo and so on and so forth at that level.
Sure.
When it goes to a higher level of art and you walk into a gallery,
you just don't know.
You don't know.
Well, I see.
So then you are right because you're just like, wow, this is like something about this. Now, if there was a little statement that said this took 20 minutes, this took an hour, I don't want that, but I think that I wonder if that would matter. I wonder if
it would definitely matter to somebody.
I think the most people
many people it would matter to. I think you're right.
I think that they would be like, oh.
Yeah, well, they already are.
I made the biggest mistake in graduate school in telling somebody how long it took me to make something. They asked me these are really interesting. Like, how long did it take you to make them?
Well,
and I was like, 15 minutes. Like,
where do
I could just see the professors fuming because I didn't say like, it took me the process. And
what?
It took me
Why do you think people care about that? Do you have a theory about that?
I think it's just a false sense of I think maybe it's something like I talked about like work. I think you want somebody to know that you labor over something that I've sweated into it.
Why do you think people? But why, I'm curious. Why do you think
that people appreciate something that takes longer to make than doesn't?
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think that would be a great...
I think I have an idea about it. Or I have some ideas.
I think obviously it's got to be... It would have to be something... Well, I think that's different for each person because I think some people grow up with a hard work ethic and some don't, and that's fine. Right? There's... I think in our culture, in the Western culture, right... This hardworking American traditional kind of thing is
sure the Protestant work ethic. It's drilled in. It's kind of part of our ethos,
which is kind of funny. Like if you look at other cultures, it's like 10 times more. Like Asian culture, like you try to outwork. Every culture has their own identity of what hard work is. But there's also but you even certain cliches of Western European culture, like the siesta culture, which is like, you know what? Why don't we take a nap for an hour? And actually, you know what? You probably do better work if you do that. Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
The more sleep I get, the better I am. No, I'm dead serious.
No, I agree.
I used to have this thing where I could sleep 3-4 hours a night and just burn out and just go.
Right.
And now I'm like, I want to be in bed by like 9 o'clock. I want to wait. I don't want to wake up at 4 like I do 4:30, but I do because it's my job. But man, I could be so much more productive in a shorter amount of time in the day with more rest.
Yeah.
Then I can less rest, more time.
Do you think maybe though that and this is just something that's occurred to me, and this could be a cracked... I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. This is just my own rabbit hole, but I wonder. I have often wondered if part of the reason people value more time and more skill in an artist is that they desperately want to worship an artist as a hero, as a special figure, as a sort of like divine... I think it's the romantic idea. I think it's romanticism that did it, man. For Western culture, I'm not talking about... But because if you really think... The thing about art history, I think I've said this a couple of times in this podcast and when I've been guests on others, because this seems to come up a lot. I really think that if you are really a good scholar of art history and you actually study, let's say, go back to even somebody as famous as Michelangelo, or go back a little earlier to like the early Renaissance... Go back to Northern Renaissance painting, which is always my favorite, like Van Eyck, Mm-hmm. That guy was just not a celebrity of any sort. I think he was well respected in the Painters Guild, and obviously he was like at the top of the top.
Oh, God, skill. Something. There was a trivia question the other day. I got to stop you just for a second.
Oh, okay, sure.
A trivia question, and my son does this thing every night. He's 12.
All right.
We do question of the day with Amazon.
All right.
We're almost up to 1,000.
You're going to put me on the spot, right?
No. You might know the answer, and I can't
try.
remember. There's a really famous artist that only made one painting.
Oh, Jesus. I have no idea.
And I can't remember
One?
One. And it's like one of the most famous, like, and the answer was, it was just something about, here's a fun fact, this artist only did one painting.
You got to give me another clue besides that.
I can't remember.
How do they know he only did one painting? What if some of his others were destroyed?
Maybe ones that were like,
okay.
As far as like, no.
That survived?
Right, like, you know, but I was just like, are you kidding me? You know? And it totally ties in with that because...
It does.
It just... And I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
Because it just popped in my head.
No, it's totally fine, man.
And that's why the way I am the way I am, because that's just how. Now you understand the way my practice is. I'm going to interrupt. I'm going to like stop.
I don't see it as an interruption.
No, but it just was like it was a fascinating fact because it made me think like, man, like how did that?
Right.
What back then though? There was less people, right? There was less.
Well,
we've talked a little bit about like the like technology, right? And now this like screen time versus.
But don't you? But I think it's also that artists were just like artisans. I mean, you know, I read this thing. I mean, because I'm a super like nerd about like Van Eyck and that whole period. Van Eyck was actually a diplomat too. Like he got sent on diplomatic missions, and he also had to paint signs for like not the butcher probably, but he had to do like bullshit work like everybody, you know, and. I think that if you look at the famous, like, it's supposedly self-portrait, the man with the red turban, is, you know, in the National Gallery in London. I mean, to me, you can see that in his face and an emotional expression that he's just he does not see himself the way, let's say, Beethoven saw himself later, those romantics, as being these, like Beethoven used to write in his notebooks about how fuck the nobles, nobody's as cool as me. And he was right. But you know, I don't think that idea about artists being this kind of like celebrity that's a fairly recent development even in Western European culture. And so I think that people are still hanging on to that, not through any fault of their own, but it's like this default. But the funny thing is that Instagram and social media are actually slowly undoing that because everybody can make cool shit. So many people. I mean, you know, dude, when I got on Instagram, I mean, I discovered 20 artists that would blow my mind a week. Now I can't remember the names. I used to criticize my students for not knowing who their favorite artists were. Dude, I can't write them down fast enough. I'm trying to keep track of them myself because I don't want to be that. But I get why. I mean, maybe people don't need to know people's names now. Like maybe the ethos is shifting under our feet, man, which I think is really great. Like I like it.
Yeah, I think to me, I think any sort of breakdown of a system is a good thing.
Well, dude, I'm with you. Well, because you're a punk rocker at heart, aren't you?
No,
I'm with you on that.
I think any sort of just like breaking something down and looking at the.
But the cool thing about the way it's breaking down now is it's not breaking down the way. Like I think that not
in a negative way.
No. Well, I think that irony and like black humor and a lot of writers talk about irony being a necessary weapon in the 40s, 50s, and 60s against this sort of really oppressive culture that needed to be, it's what the abstract expressionists broke down, the Western European snobby bullshit, But that was done in about a generation, and then irony kind of turned on itself and became kind of a toxic, dead end, right? And I think that's what I like about what we're talking about now is that it seems like it's about building things, like building communities, inclusiveness, That to me, actually, for me, comes right back to the conversation we're having about the multiplicity. Like the idea of having no single identity, but multiple identities could be seen as an extension of what we're talking about, where it's kind of just about joy. And I know it sounds gooey. I sound like one of my self-help books, which I actually read those now, by the way. And I actually like them. I mean, I can't even believe it. But that's good. It's all good. So I'm looking forward to a time where Brian Johnson is actually the guy who is the model in terms of what your aesthetic should be, not the exception. Like what if multiplicity were just held up as a potential value, not a liability, or not even an exception? It could happen, man.
Yeah. I just think I guess it could be a difficult thing because for some to grasp just because.
For sure.
Because of the fact of the way that we buy and sell product and we make advertisements.
But why couldn't that change?
It can, but you're talking about money. And you're talking about industries that create things for sale. But
I'm not even talking about getting rid of the old model. I'm talking about a parallel road that I think
No,
so.
it just go. It's everything that I've ever learned in design.
Sure.
In
I know.
illustration.
I know.
Anything is
Right.
is you are to make something just like something else, but slightly different.
But Brian, there's so many. Okay, what about the Coca-Cola bottle? You know, like I remember being friends with graphic designers back in the '80s, so this is a long time ago. But I can't remember who's the guy who designed it. Is it Massimo Vignelli, that guy who died recently? Didn't he design the Coke bottle? I don't. But I mean,
don't quiz me.
dude. I mean, I'm not. I'm definitely not quizzing you, man. I can't fucking remember either. But I mean, to me, the irony, even in current history, is that some of the huge icons of design, art, or whatever are things that broke the mold, and then they become orthodox. Then they just become kind of folded into the canon. But people don't seem to want to remember the kind of subversiveness that created those, many of them. I'm not talking about all of them. I'm not saying everything good has to be subversive. Tradition, dude, I mean, look at the kind of art I like. I love the old masters. I mean, I love tradition. But a lot of things that are icons of our culture, when you actually do the research, like the light bulb, for example, or electricity, I mean, that's the thing that kills me. Or the photograph, man. I mean, do you know how the photograph was like a poor stepchild to painting for 50 years, more than 50 years? I mean, I think it took people like Edward Stieglitz and, you know, those early 20th century New York photographers, and it was not an easy fight for them, you know, to have any respect in the collector art world at the time, you know. I mean, I'm sure they loved what they were doing, but photography was basically trying to ape painting. If you look at those early photographs from the 1860s and 70s, they're like doing these really cheesy history painting poses. They're clearly trying to be paintings, and they're not. They weren't really owning what made them. Photography found it. It took photography a while to kind of be in its own skin.
Yeah, I always loved that. Was the one that was the coolest part of the history of photography class.
Oh, you took that? That's cool.
Yeah.
I've never taken an actual class.
And that's when they talked about when everybody was able to access a camera, like the common person or it is exactly the same thing.
It
as
is
getting an iPhone now.
Totally.
Except however many years ago that happened,
right?
56, whatever it was, right? And so 100 years. I don't know the dates very well, but I just remember very interested in that part of the history of photography, where all of a sudden everybody walking down the street could take a picture, and it wasn't this like hierarchy of only certain people could have cameras.
Well, I've heard a lot.
Painters.
Yeah,
anybody can paint. Anybody can.
Fuck yeah, I can.
But that's the best part about it. Is there is sort of a fascination of, like, you know, having this thing where before social media, before a lot of heavy phone use or heavy, like, having everybody to be able to have a platform on an equal playing field. Yeah. That you sort of had people that were very talented, whatever that means. They were the ones in the spotlight, and everybody else wanted to be like them and would go to school and study and try to, you know, get to a level. And it's back to that skill thing, right? It's like you busted ass. Now, I don't think there's that motivation. I think the motivations are different.
I don't think it fucking matters if you have any training, man. And you can make amazing pictures. You know what it reminds me of, man? You know, it was 2016. It was right after Trump was elected. Hillary and I went to Oaxaca, to Mexico. And during that trip, we went to Monte Alban, which is this famous Toltec ruin. And we got this interesting lecture from one of the guides about how the Toltec priests, and I think this is also true of Aztec priests, had these crazy kind of sham theatrics to kind of make the crowd fear them more. So they had these tunnels between these things, and they would like shoot off like a pop of, you know, explosion of some kind, and then they would run through the tunnel while the dust was clearing, and then they would appear over here. And of course, everybody thought it was magic. So I know this sounds like a stretch of an analogy, but to me, I remember when social media started, how a lot of people who I know who were photographers would say, "Oh, I can't stand this fact that everybody's a photographer now," and they said it in this really demeaning way. And to me, you know what it's like? It's like the priests, the Toltec and Aztec priests, wanting to make sure that they are special, that they put the fear of God into these poor slobs, you know, the commoners, where in fact there are just people too, you know. And so, like, I just call bullshit on it, the whole thing. Actually, I think that anybody with a camera could make a sublime picture. I'm not saying that people who train hard aren't amazing people, because training does count, and you can become obviously that has lots of value. I just don't think it's a prerequisite for value. To me, that's the distinction I would make.
Right, I think, and that also goes with the level of whatever device you're using, right? So
that's true too.
When
I got
I have a new camera that's like videoing us right now, and I barely know how to use it.
It's hard to take a bad picture with it.
You can go full auto mode, and you're just it's amazing.
The color,
But the thing is, and I think about this, I guess it kind of circles back to talking about things that the labor thing.
Sure.
If you're building a piece of furniture,
yeah,
and you don't make that thing strong enough
that's true.
to last,
yeah.
I don't care how pretty it looks.
You're right about that.
There are certain things that you need to labor over.
Oh, no question. I agree with you, man.
Yeah, and I think you're right. But that's why the phone. I don't even know why they call it a phone, because it's not
the device.
Phone.
Call it a device.
It doesn't even have like phone. It's funny when I open the phone and you dial. If you actually dial,
I know.
Like, wow, they still threw this.
Yeah, I know.
Joe Rogan he had this awesome bit on it one time, and he's just like, "What do you?" He's like, "Why do you put the old technology in with the new technology?" He's like,
I think I know why. Don't you think you know why? Because people can't take such a shocking change. It's like one time
all of a sudden, if there was no numbers,
people would just be like, "I'm not doing this." I mean, one time I had a friend who was like a middle manager at McDonald's back in college, and he actually said something that's kind of profound that relates to this conversation. He said, "Yeah, man, I was at a training session, and they went over their general strategy, and this may not be true now, but the general McDonald's philosophy of corporate moving forward is always keep something old and always introduce a little something new, so that and that's basically what the numbers on the iPhone are." Or being able to dial.
I think it goes across the board with everything.
Sure.
Look at cars right now. They just put out a Ford Bronco. The thing is square. It's a box.
Yeah.
But that's the nostalgia, right? You want
that's right.
Because that thing is tough looking.
Yeah.
But that's all that has to do with marketing and things like that.
Sure.
But
they have focus groups for everything.
Why would I want this old stupid thing?
Well,
I'm like, I don't think that they would make something like. They might make something like it. But
listen, nostalgia. I mean, let's face it, desire. I mean, I think one of the coolest shows that dealt with this in a very, very intelligent way was Mad Men, when Don Draper is constantly these monologues and these kind of speeches he gives people about advertising. I mean, he is talking about how things work now, man. It's not just then. And he's. I don't know if you ever saw that show, but
barely.
It is fucking good. I mean, there was this.
But that's one of those shows that you can just go start watching, and it's not. Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously it has its like soap opera-y interest to it, which is also really cool. But it's about advertising, and Don Draper, the character, is like this advertising genius, and he's sort of like a lost character from the war. And there's this whole thing where he's stolen something. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. He's sort of like a ghost. But the one thing he can do, his life is a mess in all these other ways, but the one thing he understands is the function of desire in commerce. And that people use their emotions, not their heads, to make a lot of decisions, financial ones. Not just what they buy, but even like if you think about playing the stock market, it's fucking gambling, man.
You want to get into that right now? Because I got some...
Okay, we don't have to get into
that. No, but I recently in the last year or so, I put. But I do it, but it's that's actually a major addiction. I found myself hours and hours watching little things go by and just hoping that it goes up, down, whatever it's going to do.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that is a really good example. Like that type of thing, right?
And it's not that there aren't people who are super intelligent and expert about it, but in the end, nobody knows what the fuck the market's going to do.
Gambling.
Yeah, I mean, but isn't that kind of what's great about it? I'm not criticizing people for that.
No,
I mean, it's an emotional thing. It's not just... You can say it's about money, but... I mean, I think that emotions... I mean, I learned this in therapy, man. Emotions are a baseline running underneath everything, no matter how much intelligence might be built on top of it. You cannot separate that out. And if you do, you're fooling yourself. And so I just think that's just a reality of what it's like to be a human being.
Yeah, no.
And I think artists, good artists, like, I mean, this weekend on my story time, I'm actually going to read Beethoven. I have this great book of Beethoven's sketchbooks and notebooks and stuff. And dude, one of the cliches about him is that he's this misunderstood genius. You know, he was a slob. He really was. But the dude was a fucking savvy marketer of himself. Like, seriously, he was on that shit.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
He's a marketing... I mean, he really was in charge of himself. And he writes all these, like, he was, like, double dealing, like, these quartets over here and then getting paid for him double from this guy, and they didn't know each other. I mean, he was smart, man, with that stuff. And so I just think that... the idea that an artist is supposed to be dumb and inspired or unaffected by, you know, I don't care about money. It's like that cliche. I mean, some of the best artists I know are very smart about their careers. You know, I mean, I somebody like Tamori Dodge, who I think is one of the best LA painters. You know, he's an amazing artist. He's also one of the nicest, humble people I've ever. I don't know him that well, but he's a good guy, and he's smart about his career. He doesn't run around like destroying his shit like I used to do in grad school. I mean, I was like living the cliche, I can tell you. I feel a little ashamed about it. But, I mean, a lot of the best artists I know are fairly quiet, humble, and driven people. You know, and they're not like Kurt Cobain or Jim Morrison, you know, screaming at the top of their lungs in the street. Which I love those guys too.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. Those cliches. I mean, I would like to. Well, Joanna Roshan and I have talked about team teaching a class sometime, and you know, we haven't talked about this. I don't know, but I would like to have a segment on demythologizing really common misunderstandings, because I think it has to do with what your own identity as an artist, and even you describing yourself as being difficult. I think you're the least difficult grad student I've ever known, man. Or not but you're in the top 10, man.
Top 10, all right.
I mean, you know, the fact that you would even feel a little guilty or bad for the professors because you have a multiple practice is insane to me. Well, to me, there's something wrong, not with you, with the system that for which that's true.
Yeah, but I mean, I would definitely take full responsibility for stating that, just because I want to. I always want to be sure of what I'm doing. I mean, I want to be sure of and very comfortable in my own skin, and that's super difficult for me a lot of times, is to be very comfortable in what I'm saying or what I'm giving advice on and stuff like that. I see. But I think decisions and choices that everybody makes, whether it's about career or life or whatever, I think this is going to sound really bad. You can almost never be wrong. And the reason why I say that is because that's your choice at that time. How could you be wrong? It's your choice. You're going to make it. So bringing a right or wrong into it, I mean, is a third party judgment, right? Being like, sure, you brought this. Well, you brought this work into the classroom, and it's a little off. You know, maybe you should try this. But you can't say that because I made that. I made that work, and that's what I'm representing. How can it be wrong?
It's
or right.
I agree with you, man.
It's just, I mean, it's existing. So there's no
right. Well, I think
that's what I found hard about school too. Grad school, it was like, man, people are going to pass judgment based on what? Based on what information?
But the idea that so here's another thing we could talk. We still have some time. Why does judgment even need to be passed in an academic setting?
Because there's a student and a teacher.
But why does it have to be a hierarchy though? Why does it have to be a judgmental hierarchy?
Well, I mean,
does it have to be?
No. You can exist as equals.
I didn't say equals necessarily, but so what I'm saying is, why can't a teacher? Okay, so a teacher does know more than the student usually, you know, hopefully. But why can't it be a situation where the teacher simply helps the student do what they're doing more effectively instead of trying to redial or tamper? Or
are you talking about at a certain level?
No, I'm talking about it at any. Well, okay, I'm not talking about learning technique.
Right.
I'm not talking about that. Okay. Yes. Okay, I am talking about a certain level then.
Yeah, you are because definitely there's
of course, yes. You have to help them, show them how to do it.
Right.
But I'm talking about the fact that, and I'm not going to name any names, but we know who I'm talking about. There's plenty of people out there who basically want to make your work for you, and they want to make their version of your work. That's their idea of a critique. Fuck that, is what I say. It's not helpful to anyone.
I lasted 1 week in an upper level painting class when somebody told me how to set up my palette.
Uh-huh.
And we all set up the palettes the same way.
Right.
And we all had to buy the same, and there was a list of
Well,
paint.
that's what I mean about the...
There was a list of paint, a list of color,
Yeah.
and the exact... You need to have Prussian blue, I'm like, are you okay?
And for some people, that palette is probably perfect. But I'm just saying, why can't there be room for the exceptional person who, like, I mean, imagine Van Gogh going into one of those classes, you know, and who was also basically told by his teachers, because he studied early on, he was told that he would never amount to anything. It's just the classic thing of, like, foolish teachers driven by their egos who can't fucking bother to open up their hearts and minds to an exception, you know, and why can't you have tradition for the people who need it and have open policies for the other people who need it? And, you know, John Cage, I'm going to go back to something I think I've repeated several times on several podcasts, but I think it's important. John Cage, in his diary, said this one thing that I keep thinking about as I'm changing my teaching philosophy, and it's this: 50 people reading the same book is a waste of time. 50 people should be reading 50 different books in a literature class. Fucking A, man. That's what,
absolutely.
Dude, I seriously, it sounds so much better.
Dude, the institution I work at, or
they're never
in education,
it's too much work.
General,
people are fucking lazy, man. They don't want to.
Every year, the 10th graders, they all read the same book.
They always do. Well, we did too.
They have the set of books, right? That they I remember asking language arts teachers, you know, here and there, of like, are you guys allowed to pick your own like books? Are the students allowed, or is this like this? This is the state's curriculum of these are the books you have to read. Or Mockingbird, then you have to read
or a teacher, or it could even split the difference. Why couldn't a teacher take into consideration the personality and interests of each student, and then assign a student a book based on that, and a different book for every student? That's what I'm doing in my class 2D design.
That's the way it should.
I'm not saying that the students should be given all the responsibility for their education, because I think that's sort of lazy teaching. But what I'm saying is, like, I'll give you the example. You know, it's like the same one. Like, I have a student, and he's one of my best students. This is an African-American guy who is multi-talented. The guy is fucking good at drawing. He's an amazing photographer, and he's a killer. He's like you, actually. He sounds just like you. He came to me at the beginning of the design class, and he was like, man, my figure drawings kind of suck, and I don't know how to do what I want to do. And he was really interested in that comic strip Boondocks, which is a great one, yeah. And I say, well, listen, man, let's do some figure drawing tutorials. So, you know, he stayed after class every day for like 3 weeks, you know, and we basically did like a mini workshop in very traditional figure drawing. So, I mean, I'm all for tradition. This was not a drawing class, by the way. This is my design class. Yeah. I'm like, do you think I'm not going to talk to him about figure drawing when that's what he needs, because it's not a figure drawing class? It's fucking crazy, man.
No, it
and so, like, I mean, where did we go off the rails where we don't cater to this individual? I don't get that. I just don't get it.
Well, I guess there's I think part of it is a numbers game.
I do get that. Sure.
You can't.
But you know what, Brian? But Brian, I am not spending more time with my students. I am actually more efficient. My class is streamlined. I don't know. I think that the idea that individual attention is more work hours-wise is just laziness, but it's not true. I think if people wanted to organize things, it's a lot more fun, man. I don't know. I'm not. By the way, I'm also want to be clear. I think that every teacher should teach that in a way that makes sense to them. So people who want to do all the same thing for all their students, that's total. I respect that. I do, actually.
But there is.
I just don't respect forcing it down everybody's throat. That model.
No, you know what it is when you teach a model that way, and you say, okay, we're all going to draw this object. Say a still life. That's great. It's skill building. But when somebody comes back and has a different approach, or a different technique, and you disregard that, and say that's incorrect.
That's exactly right.
That's where the problem is.
Dude,
it's actually the reaction of the product that's been made and then brought back to you, and then your reaction to a student after that. That is always where the problem lies.
I agree, man.
Because for some reason, I think teachers, some of them think that, I have more work now. Now I have to figure out a way. I have to respond to this student's work and this one and this one. I thought we were all drawing this object.
By the way,
and they were all supposed to have the same shading technique, and now they don't, and now everything's screwed up, and I'm angry, and I'm, whatever. Yeah. That's been around forever.
Yeah.
But that's because those types of people shouldn't be teaching.
You said it, not me. No, I agree with you, man.
There's nothing you can. There's no other. Or they can learn how to change their approach.
Right.
Which is super difficult for people. When you get in the later years of teaching, most people just don't want to do.
Well, I just changed my whole approach, but I mean, I again feel strongly that people should teach the way they want to, but. Theodore Roethke, the poet, who is also an amazing teacher at the University of Washington in Seattle, there's a book called Straw for the Fire, which is a really great collection of sayings. There's a whole section on teaching, which is pretty, I almost think every teacher would get something out of reading it. But he kind of summed it up. He said, the great crime in teaching today is lack of generosity, lack of a generous spirit. And by the way, it's your fucking job to have a generous spirit. It's what you're getting paid for.
Right now,
that's what I think.
Right now, this has never been more true. With the fact that the way we're teaching through, Zoom and things like that is, we for our student body in the high school setting is we're told by the state, by the administration, whatever. And I agree that we are to accept more late work, give the students more grace, give them more time. And I don't have a problem with any of it.
No.
At all. I wish my students had more time to work on
Of course, man. Well, these are exceptional.
But I'm a visual arts teacher. I also don't assign 30 essays during the semester in a language arts or history class where I have to get.
But I think we only have 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
Right?
You get what I mean? But
I get exactly what you mean.
But I think kindness and leniency and listening, man. Just like dude, opening your mind to It's even difficult for me to listen, and
it's difficult for me too, man.
You get older, you have children, you as married as long as I have, you better know how to listen. Don't
you think that's true of life?
Absolutely.
So I mean,
just in general.
Yeah.
But I think that's hard. I think that's going to be more. I think it's more difficult to teach that nowadays.
Maybe
with the way technology is. I
think
it's harder to get somebody to buy into that.
Maybe. But I think just don't give up the fight, man, because I think you can make a difference even if people don't acquiesce. I don't know, man. I guess that's a whole nother. Maybe we'll have another round of this.
I'm down for part 2.
We'll do part 2 sometime. Yeah, let's do it sooner than later, man.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I don't want to get cut off. Brian, I admire your work. You're really one of the most interesting artists I know. So thank you for being on here, and thank you for designing the. I'm going to shake hands here.
Yeah, well, you put your hand up.
Design.
I'm old school.
I like being old school. All right.
The vid.
we've got the trees T-shirts, so hopefully we'll make some more.
No, these are fun. I look, man. I do whatever. Do whatever.
I love the logo. I've always really loved it. Yeah. So, thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in. Yeah. We will see you next time. Peace.
Cool.